Hit points. First time anybody ever ran like a fantasy game that would be considered sort of like a role-playing game was Dave Arneson in his parents' basement, and one of his players was Bob Meyer. And Bob shows up, and he's all excited to play this game, so he runs up to a troll. Dave rolls some dice, and he says, "You know what? It hit you, and your character is dead." Well, that was from a time where there weren't any death saves or any hit points or anything like that to keep your character from getting killed with just one blow. And Bob said, "You know what? I'm not very pleased with this experience. I'm not going to play this." And he didn't play it for months until they finally figured out how to put hit points into the game. So that's kind of an interesting prelude to what death saves are all about, because death saves are an extension of what hit points are, because hit points are basically the original death save. Hit points. Hit points are kind of an interesting thing. Most gamers today that have just started playing with versions of D&D or variants of D&D think of hit points, when you lose them anyway, in terms of you get a death save so that you can see if your character actually dies because you went below 0 hit points and you've run out of options at that point, but you still got that extra die roll. But in the original game, you had hit dice, which were rolled on 6-sided dice, and then later, I don't have any big dice to represent the other ones, but later on you had 8-siders. I got an 8-sider here. You had 4-siders, and you had 6-siders as your hit dice. And so it was a little bit more varied, but we're still coming back to the same concept. You've got hit dice that prevent your character from dying if you don't get huge blows. So let's look at, I've got Tanisborg here. I'm going to put it in here. If you look on, I think it's page 114 or somewhere in there, just like most role-playing games, it has hit dice in it. It's kind of a fun book because it's got its own combat system, and a lot of that is based on what Gary and Dave were posting online about home rules that they used in their own games. So the ideas they presented that didn't make it into the original draft of D&D are just piled on into this system, which makes it sort of retro, but also somewhere in between at the same time. But it's got character classes listed here, and it tells you each level how many hit dice you get. So you got your hit dice, and your hit dice are kind of a death save, which is kind of a weird way of thinking of your hit dice, but that's really how that's kind of what they were thinking when they put hit dice into the game. The original game, Dave Arneson ran a session before even Gary had heard of it yet, and Bob Meyer was in that game. It's the infamous game Under a Troll Bridge, where some of the players show up and there's trolls. Hardly anybody remembers what happened, but Bob Meyer says he ran up to a troll and he tried to kill the troll, and some dice were rolled and he died instantly because he didn't know how strong the troll was. He didn't know how many hit points it had, and there wasn't any way to sort of give him some sort of saving throw or anything to keep him from dying instantly with just a 1 die roll. So Bob didn't like that. He said, "I'm not going to play this game with you guys." And he didn't play it for months because he was just like, "I'm not playing a game where we run around and then somebody rolls dice and I'm dead. It's just not fun." So you've got that aspect to hit points where it's really the players asking, the players, Bob, is saying, "This is a fun game except for I died instantly. I need something to keep me going, right?" And so the hit points were invented, but the hit points are also coming from kind of a historical wargaming background of like there are earlier games that have hit points. Most of those early games that had hit points were like naval war games. They were like Fletcher Pratt I think it's from about 1937. Fletcher Pratt had ships, and they have armor, and they have hit points, and when you run out of hit points, your ship sinks. So when they ported this idea of having hit points in a game that involved individual players, that was pretty much where they were taking it from. And Dave Arneson even said that he devised the Dungeons & Dragons combat system from a naval combat system that he'd been using, that he made up for his friends to play. Now, the other thing about that is that in a historical game, you kind of have, I guess I can just sort of, I don't know if it's worth drawing, but I'll try it. You kind of have an interesting idea because in a historical game, you've got a unit, right? And so the unit, let's say it's a cavalry unit, has, let's say it's got 100 men in it, right? So in wargaming, you have a unit of 100 men, and those 100 men are each considered 1 hit point. They're kind of treated like this big, big amoeba, living amoeba thing. And they run around doing their thing, and they get into fights, they lose points, but those are literally counted as individual men. And so then you've also got, like I just described, ships, and those have, they can have like 10,000 hit points, but it's the same concept. You got one ship, it's got 10,000 hit points. You're using some form of measurement that's creating a little bit of a more granular system so that you don't just take one hit and you sink, because nobody likes that. So in RPGs, we started to go to a real, it's the same concept. It's a 1-to-1, but we're thinking of the 1-to-1 as one person, right? But that's the problem. We need to be able to find a way to create a little bit of granularity in the saving throw by giving that person from 1 to, at least for in the early game with 6-sided dice, 6 to 7 really hit points depending on your class, or 1 to 7. I'm saying 6 to 7. 1 to 7 points on a first level character depending on your class. So that's a pretty basic idea there. So when we're looking at these numbers here on this page, we're really talking about physical damage and physical loss, right? You've got a military unit of 100 men, it gets into a battle, it loses 50, it's at half strength, right? So that means it's not going to fight at full strength either. Ships are the same thing. As you take hits in Fletcher Pratt, you start to lose guns. So if you're at half damage, you've taken half hit points, you have half your guns left and you're doing less damage. And so you have this graduated sort of deterioration of your ability. That's where things get different. When you get to D&D, you've got your hit points, right? You take hits and you're just fine. You've got all these hits. You're taking, let's say I've got 7 hit points. Somebody whacks me for 5 points. That should really smart, right? But it doesn't, because we're treating these things in a different way. We're starting to get more abstract. And so we're not, in order to keep the game simple and fast moving, we're treating these things as a very abstract concept, that these hit points are maybe luck or I don't know, maybe skill. You're parrying the blows. Like, yes, they are getting a blow that would normally hit, but because you have your hit points that are soaking it up, it really represents that you parried it partially and you're not taking actual physical damage. And if you look at the original Dungeons & Dragons DM's Guide, this is a really loved copy. Somebody loved it so much that they just used the heck out of it and they had to tape it back together. But it's a wonderful book. But if you look in here, there's a section which I actually got blown up a little bit, which Gary talks about combat. And when he talks about combat, he's really, I won't read it all, because it's, the problem with Gary is that he often wrote in a thing called High Gygaxian, which is really verbose, and it's a little hard to read aloud. But what he really says in here is that with D&D, the whole idea was to treat the game more in terms of abstraction and to move away from the granularity and detail of a war game. And so he literally says, you take damage, and it's not necessarily that you're taking physical damage. You're being worn down, and you're not going to be, your combat ability is not going to be affected, and it's just, we're still in this kind of abstract sort of luck point sort of stage with these things. When he talks about that, we're not stage. We're in a realm of, we're going to treat our hit points as luck points. And so you have this saving throw that you get that's been pre-rolled before you even play the game. That means that your character doesn't just get whacked the first time it gets hit. You get to keep going. So I think that's really interesting. I had always thought about these things when I was younger. When I played D&D, I had so many debates about what are hit points? What do they mean? If you get hit, you should lose your combat ability. But if you do that, it screws up the fun of the game, basically, is what Gary says here, and he's right. I'm trying to think what else about this. The other interesting thing is that we can trace these hit points back. Like I talked about Fletcher Pratt's Naval War Game, which you can go out and look up. It was created in like 1937. It's pretty amazing, actually. It's a really great game. But these things, we know, like Dave Arneson and the Blackmore Bunch, they were playing Fletcher Pratt. We got photographs of them playing it, and they've got all these little lead ships all over the floor. So we know they were using a game early on that had hit points, but then they also were using this game called Strategos, which if you haven't seen Secrets of Blackmore, which I highly suggest you go watch, we talk about Strategos a lot because that's a major influence on the roleplay aspect in RPGs. So they found this old game. It came from 1880. We're talking a really old game, but it had these sort of free-form concepts that gave players in the war game a lot of liberty to make decisions and change the outcome of the game, and even utilize the environment in the game. So they were really into this. Like I could go on and on about that, but they were so into it that they started adapting the game to their own rule sets. And David Wesley created Strategos-A, which was like a Napoleonic era game, and then they had other variants, and one of the variants that came out was Strategos-A, which I have some printouts here that you can look at. Strategos-A was created by Dave Arneson and Randy Hoffa, who was another person in their group. And what's interesting about Strategos-A is that this is one of the first times you see hit points being ported over to another, something that isn't like a big military unit or a ship. They're using it to represent a single living creature. And so you go into the rules here, and back here on, I think it's the third page, right here, elephants, one equals one. That means one figure is one elephant, right? And it takes 5 hits to kill. So they literally put hit points in there. And so if a bunch of figures that each represented maybe 100 men were trying to attack an elephant, they would have to successfully hit the elephant 5 times in order to kill it. That's pretty interesting because this is 1969. D&D won't be published until 1974. We're 5 years before the creation of D&D. We're already seeing hit points in Dave Arneson's game designs, and I think that's pretty awesome. So it's really interesting that we've come to this point where you've got this game that has a saving throw, which is a death save, which is supposed to keep your character from dying. But really, before they had death saves, they had this other saving throw, which was your hit points. And it was kind of hidden in there because you'd roll it before you played. But your hit points that you rolled before a game session and would get bigger and bigger as you gained levels were actually your death save. And it also points to the abstraction of what they were doing, because you can see that they started out with war games, and these, in a war game, if you're driving a ship around the ocean and it gets beat up, it's just going to keep getting beat up, and at the end of the battle, whoever's ship is sunk, and whoever's just isn't. But in an RPG, you have things like healing spells and stuff like that allows you to like boost somebody's hit points, but at the same time, it's just strange because you like to think that you're in battles and you're taking hits, but you're kind of shrugging them off, and you keep fighting. Or the monsters, it's the same thing. You're whacking them, and you're cutting up the monsters, and eventually they just die. But if the hit points aren't really damage, I don't know what they are. We're just dealing with an abstraction. And so healing spells become, you just kind of try not to think about it too much because it's an elf game, right? So hopefully that's a lot of fun for you to think about. I like to talk about these kind of things. And if you have any questions about it, just get into the comments, ask me questions. I'm glad to answer questions. I'll be around answering questions all the time. I always check back just to see if anybody's commenting on things. So thanks for watching. Hopefully you'll tune in again, and we'll see you next time on The Informal Game.